everyone, and welcome to your next lesson on the relationships topic area. So far, you've covered part 1, which was sexual selection, part 2, which was factors affecting romantic relationships and attraction to a potential partner. Part 3 now is what we're moving into, which is theories of romantic relationship. Now, I would recommend that you highlight that word there, all right, theories of romantic relationship, because this can often catch people out. Anytime that it asks you in an exam question to refer to theories of romantic relationships, you can only cover the theories that are listed here, okay? So social exchange theory, equity theory, Rustbult's investment model, and Duck's breakdown model, okay? Anytime we see the word theory, you are only allowed to refer to those. You wouldn't be allowed to refer to anything from the factors section, for example, okay? Now, whilst it's not officially titled this on the specification, the first three kind of relationship theories that we're going to cover here, social exchange, equity theory, and Rustbult's investment model, are really a theory of how the relationship is maintained, okay? We've been through the initial stages in part 2, which was factors affecting. Part 3 now is how do we keep a romantic relationship going, okay? So we are going to cover these 3 theories here, okay, in a succession of 3 video lessons. Social exchange is what we're going to start with, equity theory, and then latterly Rustbult's investment model. Now, all of those 3 theories that I have just mentioned to you, including social exchange, which we're going to cover today, are known as economic theories, okay? So first and foremost, we want to just get to the bottom of what we mean by the word economic. And if you think about it, plain and simple, in terms of a business, anything to do with economic kind of transactions is to do with profitability, okay? So essentially these theories of relationships are being justified, i.e. they are being maintained in terms of what profitability they give the person in that romantic relationship. So all these 3 theories, we want to be considering that as the overarching theme. They are only being maintained or justified because they are profitable. So, the first theory, social exchange theory, as we've already said, does view romantic relationships like a business transaction, quite a sterile theory, no emotions kind of involved at this point, and they argue that a relationship will only be maintained if you are to make a profit, okay? Now, how do we actually work out our profit in a relationship? It's a very nice, easy, simple kind of like formula to remember. We firstly work out what our rewards are, i.e. what are the things that we gain from our romantic relationship, and then we minus the costs. So what are the things that are detrimental to us? What are the things that we don't enjoy? Now, if we take the overall rewards and we minus the costs, that will leave us with our overarching profit level. And it will only be maintained, recall, according to social exchange theory, if we deem that profit level as acceptable. So I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of a scenario here, okay? And we're going to attempt to calculate the profit in this particular relationship. We're going to try and work out the rewards and the costs, and we're going to see whether or not this relationship would be maintained. So if you want to just pause this for a moment on the screen, okay, and just take a second to read through it, and then we will resume. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to take a couple of minutes there, okay, to read through this case study of Julie and Chris, okay, and you've tried to pull apart in your mind, hopefully, what some of the rewards and costs are, and you've been able to make a little kind of judgment call as to whether or not we think this relationship would be maintained according to social exchange theory. Just FYI, if you want to refer to social exchange theory as set, that's totally acceptable. If you say full the first time, social exchange theory, and then abbreviate it from that point on, that's fine. Okay, so back to Julie and Chris. So let's have a look at the rewards initially. So for Julie, okay, we've got the fact that she's in love, okay? Obviously, love is one of the biggest rewards that you can have from being in a romantic relationship, so let's not discount it, okay? So she's in love. She's also very attracted to Chris, okay? He's tall and he's handsome, everything that she wants in a man, all right? And it says her friends continually comment on that. He gives her compliments, so he's always saying he's proud to have her as his girlfriend, and he shows her off to his friends. He gives her a peck on the cheek in front of them, so he clearly shows adoration. Um, and they've got mutual interests, so he likes shopping, so that's something that they can do together, so a bit of companionship. He gives her gifts, so he takes note of things that she likes when they're on the shopping trips and then turns up with them all gift wrapped. And one of the best things for Julie is that he's much better than her ex-boyfriend. So it says here her ex-boyfriend cheated on her, so 2 of her ex-boyfriends have done that. So Chris is substantially better. However, at this point, we start to see some concerns, okay? So the first cost associated with this relationship is a loss of friendship. And I've just noticed there that there's a typo. Apologies for that, okay? So a loss of friendship. What we've also got is a loss of hobbies. So she's playing less tennis than what she used to play before. She's also having quite a few arguments with her mum, so it's creating some sort of family conflict. So whilst we've got all of these rewards, and I've put love up there twice to emphasise how important that is, there are some quite significant costs associated with this relationship. We do have one further reward at the end, though, that even though there is this kind of conflict bubbling underneath the surface between Julie and her mum, luckily for her, Chris is quite a good listener, so that's another reward to add in, okay? Now, it would seem, according to social exchange theory, that this relationship would be maintained because the rewards far outweigh the costs in this scenario. So Julie is likely to view this relationship as rather profitable, especially considering that it's better than her previous 2 relationships, and it's likely therefore that she will maintain it, okay? So we're now gonna go on and have a look in a little bit more detail, okay, at what the finer aspects of social exchange theory are, okay? So you want to open up your booklets at this stage to page 20. And this is what you will see. So you want to add on that abbreviation there. So social exchange theory, SET is what you can call it from this point forwards. Was proposed in the late 1950s. And we've already said that that is an economic theory. Okay, so all relationships are justified by their profitability. So what we want to consider now before we move forward is what we think of as being the rewards of being in a romantic relationship. Now, I know we've just had the case study of Julie there that's given us quite a lot of food for thought. So by all means, you can pop some of those examples into this little space here on page 20. But is there anything else that you would view as a reward of being in a romantic relationship? So pause this now, okay, and then we'll take a look at what some of the common examples are. Okay, so you should have had a minute or so there to consider some of the things that we would class as a reward in a romantic relationship. Now, before we just go through the answers to those, I've just got a quick note that I would like you to pop in to your booklet, somewhere up here in this kind of top right-hand corner on page 20. And it's quite important that you understand this before we go any further. And this is that we don't consciously interpret every action as a reward or a cost, okay? So not everything that happens in a relationship do we instantly put a magnifying glass over and think that's a reward or that's a cost. We kind of go through the motions with our relationship and we're not consciously actively thinking about it all the time. However, we do use this kind of profit level at kind of regular intervals over the course of the relationship. Often when we're unhappy or feeling a little bit unsettled in the relationship, and we kind of consider whether the profit level is high enough to stay, okay? So this doesn't happen on a day-to-day basis, but it does happen at regular stages throughout the relationship. So you want to just pop that in to the booklet. So once you've got that in, let's now take a look at what these rewards and costs are. So remember, social exchange theory says that a relationship will be maintained as long as the rewards, okay, outweigh the costs, okay? So this is known as the minimax strategy, which I'll get onto in a moment, where we're attempting to maximize the rewards that we get from our romantic partner, and we're attempting to minimize the costs. So what are these rewards and costs? The costs, to begin with, may involve time that you have to spend with your partner, okay? Obviously, that's quite a big commitment in the early stages of a relationship, as is the energy that you have to commit to seeing them. So if you're in the early stages, there might be a lot of dating involved, maybe some travel involved. You might lose friendships because depending on where you end up settling, it might be that you predominantly end up with one person's friendship group rather than another. You might have to make several compromises. You might have to put up with bad habits, okay? I know that my partner's got a lot of bad habits that I put up with. So they're kind of like the things that we would typically class as the costs. The rewards, however, are quite fruitful. So at the top, we've got companionship, which is just this idea that you've got somebody to spend time with, all right? Somebody to do things with. That's somebody who you can sit in total silence with and not have to think about what you want to say. That's kind of true companionship, okay? We've got the idea of affection being quite rewarding in a relationship. We've got sex, emotional support, just having somebody there, so having a partner to do all the things that life throws at you with, and then fun, enjoyment, hobbies, etc., etc. Okay, so you want to make sure that you filled in that space on page 20 for the rewards and the costs. Now, I said a couple of moments ago that this is known as the minimax strategy, and we attempt to maximize rewards and minimize the costs. What we also try to do is to match or exchange any rewards and costs our partner gives us so that it's equal, okay? What you don't want in a relationship is a sense of imbalance. You don't want one partner to be the rewarding partner and one partner to be the costly partner. So whenever you do receive a reward, it's often reciprocated where the receiving partner will do something back, all right, for the giving partner. Because equality in a relationship could actually be considered as a reward. Okay, if you've got that balance in your relationship, then that's quite healthy, that's quite rewarding. If it's a one-sided relationship, then that's less likely to be profitable, essentially. Okay, now I'm just going to pause you here. Okay, that's your first kind of chunk of AO1 material. Just going to pause you for a second, and we're going to kind of skip forward a little bit and make a consideration of a potential discussion point here. Okay, so what is the problem, okay, with using this theory and the concept of rewards and costs to assess how good a relationship is? And are there any problems associated with trying to measure costs and rewards? Okay. Is there a particular word that we would use in psychology to describe someone's own interpretation of something? And could that have a bearing on our interpretation of what costs and rewards are? Okay, so can you think what that word is, all right, where it's down to someone's own interpretation of what is costly and what is rewarding? And to kind of hammer that point home, look back at your list of rewards and costs. Is there anything which you could argue would be a cost to one person and a reward to another? So, for example, affection. I am quite an affectionate person, okay? So I'm quite cuddly, I'm quite tactile. I like kind of hugs and things like that. My partner, on the other hand, is not as affectionate, okay? And for him, sometimes I can get a little bit overbearing, okay? He sees that as a cost, whereas I see it as a reward. is there anything else from that little list that we've made that you think could be the same, all right? And what is that word that we would use to describe this? Just pause it a second and see if you can think what that word is. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to kind of give that some consideration. A lot of things that one person classes as rewards may be costly to another. So affection might be one. It sounds bizarre, but sex might be another one. Okay, kind of companionship and time spent together. One person might see that as very rewarding. Another person might see it as costly because it's a bit stifling that you want kind of like freedom from the partner. And the word that we would use in psychology to describe this is subjectivity. Okay, so this theory and the concept of rewards versus costs is a little bit subjective. Okay, it's down to an individual's perception of what is rewarding as what is costly. Okay. So we're going to move on now to the next little chunk, okay? So we've discussed what profit is and where it comes from and this kind of basic concept of it being an economic theory. We now need to consider, though, something other than profit, because social exchange, whilst that is a fundamental aspect of it, it's not all to do with the profit. Okay, so what we have to consider here, okay, is that we make comparisons within our relationships, okay, to help us decide whether or not the profit that we're getting from our relationship is enough for it to be maintained. And there are two of these comparisons that we actively make. We've got the comparison level, which you can abbreviate to the CL, and we've got the comparison level for alternatives, which is our CL alt. So we're going to start with the comparison level, okay? So this is what we expect or what we think we deserve in a relationship, okay? Now this is fundamentally based on predominantly our previous relationship. So you want to highlight or underline that because that's the major thing that shapes us, okay? So what we think we deserve from a relationship or what we expect from a relationship largely comes from previous experiences, but it can also be shaped by our experience with social norms. And those social norms can often be put together from exposure to the media, from books and from films. Okay, so what do we expect to get in a romantic relationship? Okay, and we're constantly using this to help us to decide whether or not the profit that we experience is good enough or high enough to stay in our current relationship. If the profit level in our current relationship is higher than what we expected or what we think we deserve, so it's greater than the CL, the relationship will be really satisfying, okay? So essentially, the CL should be low, okay? Our profit should be high. The CL, the compared level, should be lower. So what you are expecting should be low, and if you're going to stay in the relationship, the profit is higher. And the comparison level affects our self-esteem, okay? So the more relationships you have, all right, the higher your expectations become. So you over time get a higher comparison level, and it's unlikely that on your fifth, sixth, seventh long-term relationship that you would be kind of willing to settle for a unsatisfactory or unprofitable relationship, okay? But this could explain why potentially early relationships, or your first couple of relationships, might last a little bit longer. For example, your teenage years, your early 20s, when you've not had much exposure to a romantic relationship, your CL is low. What you expect or what you think you deserve from a romantic relationship is significantly lower at that stage. So even if the relationship isn't that profitable, it's still going to be maintained, if that makes sense, okay? And I just want to refer you back, okay, to Julie for this example. So if we recall Julie had a really low CL, all right, very, very low, because her current relationship was much more profitable than her expectations. Okay, her expectations were really low because she'd had poor relationship experiences in the past. So her last two boyfriends had cheated on her. Thus, this relationship is likely to be maintained. So you can see there how the CL works. Okay, it affects your self-esteem, and then that will give you a concept of what you expect in the next romantic relationship, and you would therefore want your profit level to be greater than the CL for it to keep going. Okay, so you might just want to pop some notes into your booklet there. Okay, so now that we've got to grips with the CL, we're going to also take a look at the CL alt. Okay, so the CL alt is now what we think we could get in a potential alternative. Okay, so it's not what we've had previously, it's what we think is out there essentially. So this can include the wider context that we find ourselves in. For example, kind of opportunities to meet people. Are we in a social situation where we could potentially meet lots and lots of prospective partners? Do you work in a job that exposes you to a lot of nice potential partners? So that's the kind of wider context. Are there better things out there in your kind of immediate contextual environment? What's going to happen in your future? Are things going to change, where better things will kind of come on the horizon, okay, and you can see a potential better partner? And are there just simply better alternatives to what you're with? Okay, so if the profit level in your current relationship again is greater than the level of alternatives that you've got, then the relationship will last. But obviously, as CL alt increases, then that is going to put you in a risky situation that your current relationship will not be maintained. So both the CL need to be low and the CL alt need to be low in order for maintenance to occur. As soon as we've got a high CL, then any current relationship will not be viewed as profitable. And as soon as you've got high levels of healthy alternatives, then again, the current relationship will subsequently start to break down. Okay. And then the last thing that we've got here to contend with, the final bit of AO1, is the stages that a relationship goes through. Because according to social exchange theory, we don't just kind of like start and end a romantic relationship in the same way when it comes to working out our profit. Okay, we go through kind of like a navigational phase where we work out what is rewarding and what is costly in a romantic relationship, what the level of profit is between the two partners, and kind of what's acceptable and what's not. Okay, so these 4 stages are already in your booklet, so you've got a little table. But what we need to do is work out the descriptions of these 4. So we've got sampling, bargaining, commitment, and institutionalization. Now, what I've got here is a muddled up list, okay? Now, they're not in the right order, so I want you to pause it for a second here, and I want you to just read through them and see if you can figure out which one is sampling, which one is bargaining, which one is commitment, and which one is institutionalization. Now, these are in the order of which the relationship progresses. So this sampling is at the start, moving into institutionalization. So take a couple of moments just to read them. Okay, so let's go through the right answers then now and see whether or not you successfully managed to match these up. And then you can take a moment and pause this and get this table filled in. So we'll start with sampling, and you should hopefully have been able to identify that sampling was statement number 3. Okay, so I did kind of point you in the right direction by using this phrase here. But sampling, all right, is at the very start of a relationship where we're basically exploring what ourselves and what our partner finds rewarding and finds costly. Okay, and we do this by a process of experimentation and a process of trial and error. So what are the things that bring satisfaction, all right, and our partners will find rewarding. What do we find rewarding, and what are the things that are detrimental? Now, this can also come from observing other people, so friends and family members in relationships. You get a sense of what is rewarding and what is costly in a romantic relationship. Okay, so that was sampling. The next stage, bargaining, is where we start exchanging different rewards and costs, okay? And we negotiate at that stage what is the most kind of profitable things within the relationship, i.e., what are we going to settle on here? What is our kind of flatline level of profit? Okay, what do we consider to be the rewards and the costs, and kind of how are we negotiating these so that we kind of settle in to this kind of long-term romantic relationship? Commitment then is where, after you've negotiated what you find rewarding and costly, commitment is where those sources of rewards and costs become predictable. Okay, so you know what your partner will find rewarding, and they know what you find rewarding. You also know what is costly. Okay, and because those things have now become predictable, it's very easy in the commitment stage to kind of increase, all right, or maximize the level of rewards and minimize and decrease the costs associated, because you've navigated your way through that difficult bargaining stage. You know what's rewarding, you know what's costly, and you kind of settle down into that predictability phase, where you start to, on your own, increase the rewards and decrease the costs. Institutionalization is just the finishing off, all right? It's the finalization, okay? These things are now firmly established, and the relationship and the pattern that goes with it are basically expected, okay? So we're in the norms of this relationship, okay? And you know kind of what works and what doesn't work for you. So those have been firmly established. So you now just want to take a moment to get that final chunk of AO1 in before we move on to the AO3. Okay, now to ensure that you've understood all the concepts about social exchange theory, okay, that we've covered as part of the AO1, we're just going to do a quick marking exercise, okay? So you're going to need a piece of paper, because you're going to also answer this question in a moment. Once we've looked at a marked version, you're going to make some improvements on this, which you can then submit to your teacher, okay? So let's take a look at the question. So, Andreas is unhappy in his relationship with his partner. He thinks that he puts more into it than he gets out, and he reckons that he deserves better. There are too many arguments and not enough fun. He believes he can find greater satisfaction with someone else, or at least on his own. So the question portion says, outline the social exchange theory of romantic relationships and refer to Andreas's experience in your answer. So it's a big question, is this? It's worth 6 marks. So let's just take a look now then at a potential response. Okay, so I've tried to pick a response from a class of mine a few years ago, okay, where I kind of collect little things that people hand in. So take a read of it, and we're going to see kind of how many marks we think we would give this. There's no official mark scheme, but we know it's worth 6 marks. We know that there's got to be good application going on here. So just take a moment to read that. Okay, so, social exchange theory of relationships, brackets set, is an economic theory of relationships, as it considers the amount of profit made by an individual whilst in the relationship. This profit is calculated by rewards minus costs equals profit. If costs outweigh rewards, the relationship will not continue. This is called Minimax theory and explains why Andreas is unhappy. He has lots of arguments in the relationship and thinks he can do better. Therefore, there doesn't seem to be many rewards. He also believes he can do better on his own, so high alternatives level is low. Okay, so we're going to now see what kind of would get credit and what doesn't get credit in this particular response. So anything highlighted in green would get credit, anything highlighted in red is an error, okay? So this obviously would reduce the marks. So, this particular individual has got a good kind of definition initially of what an economic theory is, and there is reference to an accurate kind of calculation or formula of rewards minus costs equals profit. However, there are then issues further on. So, if costs outweigh rewards, the relationship will not continue. This is called minimax theory. That's not technically correct. So, minimax theory is where you attempt to maximize the rewards in a relationship and minimize the costs in a relationship. Okay, so that bit's not quite right. And then this last bit at the end is muddled. He also believes he can do better on his own, so high alternatives level is low. That doesn't make sense at all. So overall, this response out of 6 get 2. There is some basic reference to set, but only basic concepts are given at the start. We could make better use of the stimulus and quote more examples of rewards and costs. The reference to minimax theory is incorrect, as is the reference to alternatives at the end. Minimal terminology, so we've got no reference to the CL and the CL alt or the stages of the relationship. And there's little application to the scenario as well. So now it's over to you. If you can take a few moments, guys, I would take about 10 minutes to do this question. Write out the stimulus, okay? You can see what's bad about this response here, and let's see if you can improve it. And remember to send a picture of this to your teacher, or if you're in my classes, this question is already in your notebook for you to start answering, okay? If anybody else is using notebook, you might want to pop it on there. So take a few moments now to answer the question. Okay, well done for completing that little application question there, okay? And remember to send that off to your teacher. So if you could do me a favour please now and just close up your booklets temporarily. What we like to do, or certainly what I like to do in my lessons, is make you think about the discussion points first and then you can complete your booklets, because in my opinion, there's nothing worse than just copying. So do try to engage with this and do try to have your booklets closed. It would certainly help you understand this material a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look, okay, at the identification to begin with, okay? And what I'm going to show you is a series of statements. And from the statements, okay, and based on this identification that we've got here, I'd like you to just think which statements would be used for the explanation and which one would be used for the conclusion. So to begin with here, we've got firstly, there is evidence that supports the influence of comparison levels for alternatives. Okay, so these are our statements. Take a minute or so just to read through those and see if you can, on your own, figure out what statements are we going to use here. Okay, so of these statements, 2 of them are reference to evidence provided for social exchange. So which 2 numbers are we going to utilise here? Okay, so Let's see whether or not you got those right. So the two statements should have been number 1 and number 4. So if we take a look at these now, all right, don't open up your booklets, but this is what it will look like in your booklet. So, Sprecher carried out a longitudinal, which means it's over a prolonged period of time, study of 101 dating couples at a US university and found that the exchange variable, okay, just a fancy word for the variable, which was most associated with commitment to a romantic partner, was the partner's comparison level for alternatives, okay? The most important, this is really sad, the most important variable which affected how committed you were to your partner in US university students were how good the alternatives were. For example, when the CL alt was high, commitment to and satisfaction with the current relationship tend to be low. This indicates a negative correlation, okay? So the more alternatives you have, the less happy you are in your current relationship, okay? So this increases the validity of social exchange theory by showing that when the costs outweigh the rewards in a relationship, then alternatives become much more attractive, okay? So that's our first evaluation point there. Like I say, don't put anything in your booklet for the moment. We're going to do 2 points first, and then you can pause it for a sec and rewind and get your booklet filled in. So this first bit of evidence is all to do with the comparison level for alternatives. The next point is a methodology point. So we're saying that there are problems with establishing cause and effect. So which 2 points now would be used to explain the problems with cause and effect? Okay, so let's see whether or not we got those options right. So we wanted 2 statements which would refer to problems with establishing cause and effect. So did you get those right? You should have had reference to the fact that it is the quality of alternatives which determines satisfaction according to social exchange, but the data is purely correlational. And then other people have argued that it's the other way round. So let's just have a look at how this fills in our booklet. So, social exchange theory argues that it is the quality of alternative which determines the level of satisfaction, okay, and that's what we've just seen in that Sprecher study. However, because the research is suggesting that it's only correlation, excuse me, where have we gone? So, because the research is only correlation, it only shows a relationship between the CL alt and satisfaction, not whether one causes the other, okay? So in fact, it could be that satisfaction determines how we perceive alternatives rather than the other way round. For example, Miller found that people who said they were highly committed to their relationship spent less time looking at images of attractive people in an experiment. Okay, so let's just read that again. Miller found that people who were highly committed spent less time looking at the alternatives. So, what social exchange theory is saying is that it's the alternatives that make you satisfied or not in a relationship. What we're arguing is that if you are actually committed, then you won't look at the alternatives. So all the data is purely correlational, okay? It's correlational, only establishes a relationship between the CL alt, not whether one causes the other. So this therefore reduces the validity of social exchange as it is implied CL alt may not necessarily determine satisfaction, it's purely related to it. So what we want to do now, okay, is we want to fill in our booklets. So you are filling in, you see here, page 22 at the moment, okay? So take a moment, pause this and just rewind it to help you if you've missed any of the blanks and fill in page. Okay, so now then that we've got those first two evaluation points in, we're going to take a look at the next couple, okay? So this one I've done for you because it's slightly harder and you wouldn't obviously be able to get these blanks on your own. So in addition to the fact that there are methodological flaws with the research, many researchers do not accept some of the assumptions, okay? So Clark and Mills are two such critics, and they argue that not all relationships involve this kind of economic exchange and reward monitoring, okay? And they try to make a distinction between kind of romantic relationships and other types of relationships. So they refer to what we call exchange relationships and communal relationships. Now, exchange relationships do involve reward monitoring and exchange of profit. Communal relationships still involve the same exchange of rewards, but you don't keep score. So this is where Clark and Mills separate between romantic relations and other relationships. So romantic relationships in all likelihood are communal, whereby there is a kind of subtle exchange of rewards, but that you don't keep score. In fact, if you kept score in a relationship, it must be a pretty miserable relationship, okay? So Clark and Mills argue that it's more communal. Yes, it goes on. It's almost like subliminal. We know that there is exchange and rewards taking place, but you're not keeping tabs on it, okay? Whereas for example, a work relationship, that is very much a process of rewards, costs, monitoring, exchange, and kind of working out who's profiting from that kind of relationship between work colleagues. Okay, it's not the only one that is of that nature. I would go as far as saying that family relationships might be almost like exchange relationships too, where there is a kind of like monitoring of who's getting what and who's profiting. Whereas romantic relationships, you're not really doing that as much, okay? It might be the same with friendship, but work colleagues is definitely an example of what we call an exchange relationship, whereas romantic relationships are communal. Now, obviously, the flaw here is that social exchange theory doesn't distinguish between any of these things, okay? So, this therefore reduces the validity of social exchange theory as it implies that it cannot account for romantic relationships. It glosses over this whole idea, okay, of kind of communal relationships where it's not really happening in the way that they portray it, okay? So we've got all of those evaluation points filled in now. So what do we do next? Okay, we would like you, if you can, to make a set of Quizlet cards on social exchange theory. These are a superb way of learning, okay, as long as you make them correctly. So, a good set of Quizlet cards should be short and concise. There shouldn't be too much information on there. And also, and a lot of people don't do this, you should be using all the test functionality on it. Don't just stick to the flashcards, because if you just stick to the flashcards, you might as well just made a set on card, okay? So do all the different tests, do all the learn functions, okay? Brilliant, brilliant way to get going with your revision. Obviously, relationships will be one of the topics on the progression exam, so it's important that you start doing things now which will help you to revise these topics later on, okay? So you want to make those Quizlet cards, please. What we'd also like you to do is answer this question, which is in your pack. So question 6 of the exam pack, to outline and evaluate the social exchange theory of relationships. And you should really send that to your teacher when you've completed it. So this question is worth 3 marks of AO1 and 5 marks of AO3. Now, one of the problems that we have with 8-mark questions is that people do way too much AO1 and not enough AO3. So I want you to really focus on trying to cut down your AO1 and trying to make sure that you write well elaborated discussion points. Now, I work to this approximation with my current year 13s, and for those kids who have got it, this really works, and it's absolutely enough to get you good credit. So for 3 marks of AO1, you want to do a third of a page, approximately, if you've got average handwriting. No more. If you do more than that, it's a total waste of time. So a third of a page. And then for your AO3, which is worth more marks, so we've got 5 here, about half a page. Which means that for an 8 marker, you should just be doing slightly over 1 page. Okay, so you do not need to do too much AO1. Okay, you want to think about how much you write for 3 marks on other questions. For example, on a 3-mark research methods question, how much would you do? If you lose sight of that and you start just kind of trying to write everything down in terms of AO1, you're going to go way overboard. So really rein it in and visualise how much you've produced for a short answer question worth 3 marks, because it should be essentially the same. Okay, and always try to do 2 discussion points for 5 marks of AO3. And that's that. Okay, so that's the first economic theory of relationship maintenance, social exchange. The next video in the series will be equity theory.